Hello, everyone, and welcome to the condensed version of this previously recorded live stream. The image I paint here is a scene from my own graphic novel, which is currently being created, called Quest for the Queen of the Forest. The finished scene, as you see it on screen right now, is a moment when the shaman bird named Onomas consults Grandfather Fire before setting out the next morning on an epic journey to find the Wise One. For those of you that don't know me yet, my name is Peter Bragino. I'm a full-time fine artist, musician, and entrepreneur. I make my living selling prints of my work through my online store, which is located at www.bragino.com. I'm currently creating art out of my studio in Amityville, New York. I'm the creator of the Guardians Bird series. This collection of 18 different bird images was created to honor the beauty of our feathered friends and to act as protection to the dreams you hold for yourself and your family. You can meet your guardian and take one home today by visiting my website. Now, without further ado, let's get to this live painting. All right, so on to this live painting. Now, this image was recorded previously on a live stream, and it's been sped up about 5 times as fast. So initially, it was probably close to 2 hours, and I'm going to condense it down to maybe about 25 minutes to make it easier to view for people that don't want to see the full version. But if you're interested in learning more about the decisions I make and the process of making art, then you can watch the full live version, the real-time version, and I talk a lot about in real time the decisions I'm making and why I'm making those decisions. Right now, I'm going to give you an overview of what happened here. So what I've started out with here is a thumbnail sketch or a black and white tonal sketch of the scene that I want to create. And the scene is a forest scene where the shaman bird Onomas consults Grandfather Fire prior to heading out in the morning for an epic journey that he's been tasked with by the Queen of the Forest to go find the Wise One. The scene's supposed to take place about dusk, just when the sun is going down below the horizon. So you'll see a light source coming from the right-hand side or the west. And then the fire itself is in a darkened portion of the forests away from the light. And a decision like that was made on purpose just so that I could play up the light source of the fire, because the fire wouldn't look very good if it was in direct sunlight, or at least it wouldn't shine as brightly. And I wanted to have that epic feeling of the fire shining on the shaman bird and his relationship with the fire in that moment. So I started out with the sketching you saw from in the beginning that I resized it, and the reason I resized it was that it just wasn't compositionally, it just wasn't the way I wanted it. Everything seemed a little bit too big. The fire seemed too big. It was like the zoomed in portion of the camera just wasn't correct. So I shrunk down the comp, I lowered it down and made the fire much smaller and gave myself a lot more area to create the forest in the background. So that basically places eventually my main character is going to be placed down a little bit lower than the center of the image, which gives me a much better composition for this image. What I'm currently doing right now is I'm just extending that forest up, and I'm trying to just block in a lot of the tone and get this comp reconstructed and back to a place where I feel it's ready to start putting color in. The reason why I'm working on this in black and white prior to color is that compositionally I need this image to read well in black and white, and that's always something that we're looking to do as artists, is to have a strong composition that really reads and tells a story without the color even being there. So it's important for me to have that working in black and white prior to me actually thinking about color. And this is just one way to go about painting. It's the method that I chose for this image. It's not the only method to use, but I really, because I didn't know what this scene looked like, and I I needed to basically figure out exactly what was happening visually in the scene. So instead of confusing things with trying to get all the colors of the fire and the sunset and all that correct, I basically limited my parameters to just a black and white sketch for right now to make sure that tonally the scene is going to read properly, that my main character is going to be placed in a portion of the scene where he's readable and he remains the main focus of the scene along with the fire. You can see at the top there, I've got the light source coming in from the right. It's like a gradient. It gets lighter as it goes to the right, which is making mention to the fact that the sun is setting and it's starting to weaken in its brightness. I'm kind of wrestling around a little bit right now with the structure of the forest area where the fire is. I'm trying to figure out what's there to the right. Eventually, what I wind up with is almost like a rock face wall, and I wind up calling it like almost like a rock altar. And I imagine that this was a spot that the shaman would come to in order to commune spiritually with with the Great Spirit, with a altar that he built over time by putting rocks up there and honoring the sacred in that moment. So this is kind of like his place of refuge, where he comes to do his meditation and his spiritual work, personal spiritual work as a shaman. I finally have gotten to color here, and the idea of the color scheme is it's not necessarily a complementary color palette. It's more like split complementary, where it's kind of like an orange-ish yellow with a green background. And initially, the color that I was laying on there was very rough. At this point, it's extremely rough. I'm just trying to get basically like the local colors of what things are, the brown of the dirt and the rocks and the rock wall, and the greenish cast tones of the forest in the background. I'm just trying to establish a basic underlying color palette that I can then go on top of and paint on a new layer, and I'll be painting in more details and diversifying the color within the piece. But initially, I just want to get the feeling correct, and it's kind of like the same thing that I did with the tonal sketch. I'm just looking to block in a general idea of what the color is going to be, so that it reads and it has the mood and the feeling that I'm looking for. I'm starting to put in some of the colors of the fire right now, and a lot of the decision making that I'm going through right now with the fire is based off of deep observation that I've had when viewing a fire. And I've been around a lot of fires within the past couple of years because I commune with indigenous ceremonies, and those indigenous ceremonies always have a fire supporting them. So I've taken on the role of firekeeper on many occasions, and I've sat and meditated and stared very diligently at the fire, observing all its different parts. And it has parts, just like a little community. It has all its little sections. It's like a bunch of different pieces that come together to construct the fire, from the coals at the bottom to the ash underneath that, the bed of ash, the sticks that are laying over the fire that are being turned into coal. And you can see a representation of that by the orange that I'm painting underneath the pieces of wood. You can see I'm actually doing that right now. I'm painting the orange on the other side, which is where most of the glow comes from the fire. If you look down into the coals of the fire, you'll see glowing embers as well, but the sticks that are being, hit directly from the fire from underneath, they're taking on an orange glow as well, and that's where the orange would sit basically in the fire. When the fire raises up, it'll turn into like a white with like a yellow light surrounding the flame licks, and you can see that represented as well. One of the other colors that's in the fire that doesn't seem characteristic for a fire, but I got it from looking at an image that was taken of one of our fire keepers keeping a fire for a sweat lodge up at the ceremony space that I commune at. It's like a purplish tone, almost like a lavender purple tone, and you can see that represented at the base on the outskirts of the fire towards the edges. And I chose to put it in here because I felt that the tone diversified the color of the fire, which, diversity in color is good for. You can see that the image right now. I'm showing you where those tones came from. At least the idea of it. The diversity of color is important just to create better relationships between color, more harmonized palette of color, interest in the image so that it's just not so bland. So I use that color and then I carry that color onto many different portions of the landscape in the darkened portion of the forest. So I'll play off that color as well as if it was shining onto the rocks. So it just gives it's a more inviting color, like a purple rather than just having brown and gray rocks. So, I wanted the image to feel hopeful and comfortable, um, and not feel. I didn't want it to feel depressing or anything like that. So I'm using those colors to kind of bring a little bit more life into the piece. And you can see at this point I'm starting to build out some of the rock wall and define some of that structure as far as the way it might look. And what I was imagining was that it's like an altar, like a natural altar that was built by the shaman. So I'm working on stuff in that vein to further tell the story of who this character is, what the space is, what it might be used for. As I go along, you'll see that I'm bringing up some of the what would you call it, the contrast of the image. I'm adjusting that constantly, the same way that I adjusted the black and white comp in the beginning. I'm constantly thinking about the relationship between lights and darks and making sure that the foreground section or the midground section where the fire is sitting within its own visual space as compared to the background. I don't want the background in the middle ground to feel like they're too close to one another, because I'm looking to establish the idea of depth and some kind of grandeur so that the scene feels epic, like it's in a really big forest and you feel that like epic feeling of the sun setting and looking out into the distance and seeing way far into the forest. This is some of the light shining up on the embers that are flying up into the air, embers and little pieces like that move and create particles in a scene are always good to add, just because they add life. It's almost like adding animation to a scene without actually animating anything, because part of what happens when you paint an image is you're giving the viewer enough information so that they can create the scene within their own head and they can imagine what's happening in the scene, which allows you as a painter to do less work and give the viewer more authority and more ability to imagine what's happening on their own, so that they become involved in the image making themselves. So it's like it's a partnership between the artist and the viewer. I'm giving enough so that the viewer's imagination can take over, and that engages the viewer in the scene, and the story starts to come to life within their own imagination, which is a very powerful thing. Novelists or people who write books do that with just words, but as an artist, just because we are able to physically show something doesn't mean we have to physically show everything. And that's one of the things that I feel is very important in picture making, is understanding where to put your details, what to say, and then what to leave alone and leave up to the viewer to fill in the details. So that creates a more active viewing experience, which I think is, it's not only important, but it's vital for an image to work, because the whole point is to get the viewer engaged in the image. And if they're not engaged in the image, if they have nothing to do, if you spell everything out for them, then there's not much that they can do when they look at the image. They may look and be, you know, dazzled by all the details in the image, but technically that's not the way we see things as human beings. We don't see details in everything. You know, if you were, and eventually when the main character comes in here, and you had stumbled upon the scene, the first thing you would do when you came upon the scene is you would notice that there's a bird shaman standing in front of a fire. Obviously, the fire would attract your attention because it's the brightest thing in the scene, and it's the source of greatest contrast between lights and darks, which is another way to control the attention of a scene. So you would see the bird, and that's what you would look at. And at that moment, when you see the bird, your focus would be in that direction. Your eyes would focus on the bird and the fire, or somewhere within that realm, and then everything around that section of your main point of focus would go into peripheral vision, and you wouldn't be able to make out details anywhere else, so you wouldn't be able to take in those details. Now, eventually you would, look away maybe, and you'd look at other things in the scene, but instead of putting all the details everywhere, we kind of sneak the details into the other sections in very subtle ways so that it gives you enough to look at, but it doesn't spell everything out for you, and it leaves something to the imagination so that you become co-creator in the scene as well. Just a little inside information about picture making. You can see it all right now that I am taking a sketch of a bird, a shaman bird that I had created in my sketchbook with no intention. It just kind of came out. But when I saw it recently, when I was looking through some images that I had scanned from my sketchbook, I saved it and thought that this might be something that could fit in with this graphic novel that I'm creating, Quest for the Queen of the Forest. Now, this may or may not be the final character design for the shaman bird, but I kind of like it. It's unique, it's interesting, and I'm going to mess around with seeing whether or not this character is going to work. But what I did at this point was I took this sketch, I put a tone over the character to turn the lights down on him to make him feel like he was in the dark. And now I'm going back and I'm repainting the firelight on top of him. And this is a technique for being able to render a character into a scene, or just render light in general on how it hits things. Because there could be a section where, if we turn the fire off, then the light will go away on the character. But as soon as you turn the light on, the light illuminates that one side of him. So I'm acting as if the light is illuminating him in that fashion. So I'm trying to put myself in the real-time situation and start from him being dark, and then imagining the light gets turned on, and then seeing where would it hit him as a character. And for me personally, that's a technique that I use, or that I began using, for understanding how light hits something. And it's a logical way to go about painting a scene and figuring out how the light works in a scene. And logic is good because it feels natural. And in the end, even though this is more of a animated look or um, comic book style rendering where it's not so perfectly realistic, I still want the imagery to feel logical enough that it could really happen. As a side note, you see, I'm constantly turning on a black and white layer that's on top of all my layers in Photoshop, and the reason why I'm doing that is I'm just checking values and making sure that the values that I'm putting on the page still support the story that I'm trying to tell, and they direct the viewer's attention to where I want the attention to be directed. So that's a technique or a method that is very helpful in being able to um, understand whether or not your image works visually for the viewer. Because you could have all the colors in the world and it could be the prettiest thing possible, but if the composition is not solid and talking about the ideas that you want the composition to talk about or directing the viewer in the direction that you want, then the image really won't work. So it's good to check it in black and white. You can see I'm adding more details and some little light spots hitting things. Again, I'm not 100% detailing all this stuff out and saying what that is. I'm just making mention to the idea that it's something, and that figuring that out and creating that story, I'm leaving up to you, the viewer. And me too. I mean, I don't know what it is technically, so maybe it'll show itself as something that's part of the storyline eventually, and that'll come back and add to the story eventually. But for right now, it's pattern, it's design. All these things create rhythms through the page. They create interest. It's a bit of a color note. The little orange specks that are fluttering all on the rock wall and outward. So all of these ideas are important as far as making an image and making it interesting for a viewer to look at it and want to continue to look at it, to search around and find little stories for themselves. I think I'm pretty much at the end where I've finalized this image. I just did a final levels adjustment, which helped me to just push the contrast a little bit better, create the darker darks, and bring the lights up a little bit, but it has the feeling that I want, so I think we're going to wrap it up here. I appreciate you watching. Thank you so much for watching the condensed version. We'll catch you next time. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel for notifications of when I go live or post new videos. You can connect with me on Twitter and Instagram by searching @Bragino. My website is www.bragino.com. Visit me there for more of my art and to purchase prints of my work. Thank you so much.